Okay, I think we're recording and ready to go.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for being here with us today. We're grateful for the time that you spend with us so that we can share some of the important updates of what's happening here in the Denver Public Schools. We are getting closer to welcoming more students back for in-person learning. So we do have several updates that we wanted to share with everyone. So last week, we extended our deadline out to September 23rd for middle school and high school students and their families to select in-person or virtual learning for second quarter. Families can do this online through our parent portal by filling out and returning the form to their school or by calling their school's front office. Once families make their choice, we will honor that choice through the end of second quarter, which will end around Christmas time. If family circumstances change and they want to move either from the in-person to virtual or virtual to in-person, they would need to work with their individual school on how they might be able to make those changes. Secondary students will be returning in a hybrid model. A hybrid model will include times during the week when they are learning using technology in a virtual setting and times during the week when they will be in person. There will be a minimum of 10 hours a week of face-to-face instruction. And the goal is to gradually increase in-person contact as we move through the school year, as long as the health conditions permit us to do that. Our deadline for elementary school students remained at the end of last week. And right now we still continue to have about 30% of our families who are opting for the online option for virtual learning 100%. Do want to talk a little bit about where we are as a community with COVID and our COVID dashboard and the case reporting. It's something that we monitor every day and certainly something that I pay a lot of attention to and at times, multiple times during the day, check to see how things are going. It's obviously of critical importance to our ability to reopen schools effectively. So we do continue to work very closely with our local health experts, including the folks at Denver Health who are working with us, as well as the Denver Department of Public Health and the Environment, to monitor what's happening with COVID in Denver. Our readiness dashboard is regularly updated with information directly from Denver Health. These are not calculations that we do. They actually are calculations that Denver Health creates both for DPS as well as for the city of Denver. Important information that we wanted to share, that's something that we actually receive from our local health experts. We are working on a DPS specific dashboard that will track the number of cases specifically in DPS, which we think will be really helpful. And will also help us make sure that we're communicating effectively when cohorts or schools are impacted. We want to be as transparent as possible with that information. In addition, we'll be providing all of our staff and families with further details on what steps are needed if a case is identified and what it'll mean if a cohort needs to move from in-person to virtual learning because of any quarantining. And we'll keep you updated as more information becomes available and as we work on that. So next I want to share with you some updates around our Reimagining Montbello and the efforts in that community. As many of you know, our community has been very interested in the recreation of a comprehensive high school in the far northeast since Montbello High School was reshaped into several small schools and closed in 2010. We're excited to share an update that we will be moving forward with filling this gap that has been missing for the last decade. The decision came after several years of community feedback that was further validated through conversations with students, staff, families, and community members, community-based surveys. Over 85% of the community and 89% of school staff on the campus support the return of a comprehensive high school in Montbello. We're going to continue to work with our community, getting their feedback and engagement on what the community would like to see in a new space as we recreate a comprehensive high school. Those conversations will continue, and particularly after Denver voters have determined if they will support a bond proposal on the November 2020 ballot, which includes a $130 million investment for updates to the Montbello campus. Depending on the outcome of that vote, DPS will either build a new facility or renovate the existing building. We're also working on plans to identify feeder middle school for the new high school to make sure that we have that continuous pipeline of students to go up into the high school. So we want to remind everybody, finally, that it would be great to get your help in reminding families to fill out their free and reduced price lunch applications. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the Denver Public Schools has provided over 1 million meals, both emergency meals during the stay-at-home order as well as meals over the summer. We're asking all of our families to complete the application by October 1st, even if you're unsure if you qualify and even if you're not planning on coming back in person. It is critically important that we have this information. This information does help us with the funding that we receive for Title I. You don't need to be a US citizen or have a social security number to apply. It's very quick and easy to do so online, and families only need to fill out one application for all of their students, even if they go to different schools. So we'd love to open it up and see if there are any questions that you may have.
Thank you. First question, Tini with the Denver Post. 2 of the readiness dashboard indicators are in the red. How, if at all, does that change the plans to return for in-school?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So obviously it is critically important. We've been very committed to an open and transparent communication process, both with Denver Health and with the community around the dashboard. Anytime an indicator goes red, we immediately convene a meeting with Denver Health to make sure we understand what's the source of that and whether or not we need to make any changes to our plans. And so the dashboard really is like an indicator light on your car. It tells us that we need to do some additional assessments to determine why that indicator light is on. So what Denver Health and DDPHE have been doing is looking deeply into what is the source of the increase in what's happening with COVID. So there are similar increases in cases in counties like Boulder, Colorado, Boulder County, which also has a large university. And the local health experts have shared with us that the increase that we're seeing here locally is an increase in the number of cases among young adults in Denver. And in fact, they have shared that they can account for the entire increase in cases as coming from students at universities here in our county. The good news is that cases among children of grade school age have steadily decreased over the past month. And so what that indicates is that the recent increases in COVID in Denver is largely among college students. And the city is going to be working with universities and colleges in Denver to both increase testing as well as reinforce basic infection prevention. All of the things that we know will be very helpful to help slow down the spread of COVID. That's wearing a mask, making sure that we're practicing social distancing, frequent hand washing, good hygiene, outdoor activities. They've indicated to us that at this time, they're not concerned that this increase is an indication of widespread community spread, and that they have encouraged us to continue to monitor this while we continue our slow, gradual, safe re-entry for in-person learning.
Thank you. Janet with 9 News asks, with the deadline to choose remote or in-person learning being tomorrow, can you talk a bit more about the hybrid model and how it will work for older students? Would it be 2 days of face-to-face instruction, 5 hours each to start?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So one of the great things about the Denver Public Schools is we have so many different kinds of schools, models of schools, and sizes of schools. Some of our high schools, our pathway schools, might have 70 students total with under 10 teachers. And then we have schools like East High School, South High School, Thomas Jefferson High School, where we have between 1,500 and 2,400 students. So each school has very different circumstances, different numbers of students who have selected in-person or virtual classes, and different numbers of staff members who have requested accommodations. And so our guidance to our secondary schools for our hybrid instruction will look different depending on the school that your children attend. And we think that's really important because we want to be able to maximize the opportunities that we have for in-person learning in every school. And we know that those conditions may be very different. And so the best way to find out what your in-person learning will look like is directly from your school. Our schools have been working on these plans and sharing that. Obviously, the number of students who select in-person and virtual makes a big difference for how that will look. We have some schools, for example, that are scheduling classes on an AM and a PM basis, and students would come to school in the morning and not in the afternoon, and then flip-flop, another group would come in the afternoon and not in the morning, with some virtual classes in the opposite times. We have some schools that are looking at 2 days a week. We have some schools that, because of their small size and the number of teachers, actually may be able to offer more than 2 days a week of instruction in person. And so each school may look different. Every school for in-person will have a minimum of 10 hours a week of in-person, plus the additional virtual time that students would be engaging in their coursework when they're not physically in person.
Great. Our next question is from Jenny at CPR. What is the approximate mismatch between virtual in-person requests at the elementary level and teachers available? Is it accurate that some teachers may have to teach in a grade level for which they are not trained or work in other schools?
Yeah, thank you. So, district-wide, our numbers would line up perfectly. Obviously, that doesn't always play out at each individual school. So we've been working really hard with our school leaders, our HR department, and several support teams to help schools design the plan for coverage, both the students who are in virtual learning with teachers who have requested accommodations to work remotely, and then coverage in the event that there is a mismatch for that. In all cases, we are assuring our school teams that teachers will only teach in classes or subjects for which they're licensed, so that's really important. In the event that they're licensed for a grade but haven't taught it in a long time, we've also committed to additional training for those teachers so they can review the new curriculum, make sure they have the resources that they need in the event they're teaching a new grade that they haven't taught before or haven't taught in a while, or if they're teaching a new content that they're licensed for but they haven't taught in several years. So we've made that commitment as well. We're also looking at some solutions where it may be that within a region we support either the need for more virtual instructors or the need for more in-person instructors between schools to help support that. Those will be temporary assignments just for this year because we know how important it is for people to be able to stay connected to the school in which they were hired, while this year they may have to have an assignment that extends beyond their own school.
Great. And Tini from the Denver Post again asking, once in person, how quickly do you anticipate having to pivot should those dashboard indicators change again? What's your window for decision making once COVID circumstances change in Denver?
Sure. Yeah, we've been really fortunate to be able to learn from districts that have opened up already. And certainly one of the big takeaways is that it's really important to be able to make that pivot, particularly for a specific group of students. And in some limited cases, we've definitely seen larger groups or entire schools that have had to move from in-person to virtual. So we are encouraging our students to take their Chromebooks home every day, make sure they're charged overnight. There will be times when an individual student will either need to go into a quarantine or isolation, and maybe not their school if they are exposed outside of school. But there will also be times we know when cohorts may need to go into quarantine because of an exposure. And we are committed to doing that immediately upon notification that there is a case. And so we want to make sure that we're prioritizing health and safety. We do have teams that are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We know that people find out information about either exposures or positive cases all the time, including on the weekends, and we want to make sure that we're prepared to be able to respond immediately.
Great. Melanie at Chalkbit asks, she has a question about the cohort size of 35 students. How did the district come up with that number, and why does it differ from surrounding districts?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So we work very closely with health experts through Denver Health around cohort sizes. And the cohort size at secondary is not referenced in the guidance from CE and the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment for secondary schools. It is referenced at the elementary level, and we actually, in consultation with Denver Health, initially looked at larger cohort sizes, and then over the summer, as we saw increased cases of COVID, we really determined that we wanted to make sure that our opening was erring on the conservative side, with a more assertive stance of trying to limit the amount of disruptions that can happen because of quarantining. And frequently what we have found as we see schools that have opened up is that it's not that there are necessarily lots of cases of COVID, but anytime there is one case, anybody who has been in close contact in a cohort needs to go into quarantine. And so we really want to try to maximize the opportunity for in-person learning by limiting disruptions. And based on the guidance from Denver Health, we really felt like going with these more conservative numbers at the lower end would safeguard our time in school, would limit the amount of exposure, both students with each other, as well as our staff with our students, and would give us the greatest opportunity to safely reopen and keep kids in school.
Thanks. Janet with 9 News, is there a final tally of percentage of students who selected the 100% remote option?
Sure. So we're not quite at our deadline yet. We're still trending around 30% of the district. It's very different depending on different areas of town, but we'll have a final tally tomorrow after the deadline.
Thanks. And Teeny with the Denver Post, is DPS still planning to limit high schoolers to 4 classes per quarter?
Yeah, thank you. So it really depends on the school and how they've set up their schedule. Many of our schools are using what we call a 4x4 schedule where kids are taking 4 classes. Some of our schools have created schedules on a more traditional 7-period schedule day. And in those cases, it's likely that students will have a combination of both in-person classes, if they choose the in-person model, as well as virtual classes to complete the semester.
Thanks. Melanie at Chalkreed asks, is DPS offering the SAT this week?
Yeah, so we are offering the SAT. I think our date is actually in October, but we are offering the SAT and the PSAT. I can confirm that for you, Melanie.
Okay, we're about time to wrap up. If you have any questions, you can follow me via email or phone. As always, thanks for joining us. Oh, sorry, one more question from Jenny here. Is the training for teachers who are licensed for but not expected in a class 1 day long?
Yes, so we've built both live classes, but most of our training for our teachers now is asynchronous. So coursework that's designed and delivered virtually that teachers can do. We have committed to provide a release day for teachers if they're teaching out of their current assignment. So if it's a 2nd grade teacher who's now teaching 5th grade, for example, we have committed to have a day both for preparation and to go through those training modules that they can do asynchronously anytime, but certainly with that day to prep with the new materials. There's a lot that goes into teaching. I have just incredible respect and regard for the work that our teachers are doing and putting in to lesson planning, both while we're in remote, but certainly as we think about everything that will go into getting ready to receive our students in person. The last thing that I'd just love to share is I've received so many great messages and done some terrific visits to schools that are welcoming our students back, and just incredibly grateful. Our leaders and our teachers who are working with kids. I was just with a group of teachers last night, several of whom are working with preschoolers or who are teacher leaders in buildings while our preschoolers have started. And they're just so excited, in many cases still nervous, but very excited to welcome kids back. We're largely hearing that with our little ones back in school, that kids are really adapting well to the new rituals and routines, that they're wearing their masks. They've come up with, fun new ways to show social distancing. So, arm waves, things like that. And so it's just wonderful to see the hard work that's gone into welcoming students back. We're going to continue to monitor the rates of COVID, stay very closely connected with our local health experts, and always be as transparent as possible with everything that's happening, both in DPS and in the city around COVID.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you back here next week.
Thank you.